They say there are certain events in history that happen that you will remember where you were at and what you were doing. In my life, there are a few of these events. Ones that right off the top of my head that I can remember was when I was 7 years old and my family and I had sat down for dinner at the kitchen table. The TV was on down in the den, and right before we started to eat, I heard the news anchor say that Elvis Presley had died. This was in 1977, but I was old enough to know who Elvis was and how big of a deal he was. My father was a huge fan of Elvis Presley, had a lot of his albums, his singles, and later as I got older, he had a lot of his concerts like on Laserdisc and VHS. That was shocking. I was like, Elvis Presley? Is that? Now, when you're 7 years old and you hear somebody passing away in their 40s, when you're a kid, that seems kind of old. I mean, but it's not, right? Of course, it's not. And then as I got older, I remember the assassination attempt on President Ronald Reagan, the Secret Service agent that jumped in front of President Reagan that literally took a bullet and saved President Reagan's life. And I believe that agent wound up in a wheelchair. I believe he was paralyzed. I remember the space shuttle exploding. It was a big deal. For the school wanted the students to watch this history in the making, if you will, of the space shuttle launching. It was, back then it was a big deal because before that it was just the rockets. But the space shuttle was the next step in this, evolution of space travel. Right? We were all sitting there watching, and it happened on TV, live TV, and the teacher just looked at the class, or my teacher at the time looked at the class and said, "Okay," and I think it wasn't long after that the principal came on the intercom and said that they didn't send us home. I don't think they sent us home. I don't remember going home. I want to say that they offered counseling to any of the kids that might have been traumatized, which that was a big deal. It didn't seem real, but it was. And of course, when I got older, September 11th, 2001, it was on a Tuesday, and we had taken off to go up to where my parents were living up in the mountains. My son was sitting in the passenger seat, and he had his little portable CD player. And back then, I used to listen to a lot of news radio. It was just normal news talk, nothing out of the ordinary. And then, of course, the first report came across the airwaves of the first tower being struck. All I heard was the tower had been struck by some type of object. They didn't know if it was a little small plane or if it was, and I'm sitting here driving and I'm like, that's strange, and of course, gazillion other people had the same thought, right? Because as we all know now, when you look back at the footage, it was a clear, beautiful day in New York, and then as well in the Carolinas where I was at. It was beautiful. It was, no bad weather, no nothing. So I'm sitting there listening, and I'm like, my first thought was, even if it's a small little commuter plane or whatever, how does that hit that tall skyscraper? How does that happen? Now, to be totally transparent here, I wasn't real familiar with the New York skyline. I wasn't really familiar with the World Trade Center towers or, nothing like that. So I thought maybe a little plane or something had clipped, like maybe the antenna on top of the skyscraper, but also at that point in time, I didn't know that was a no-fly zone. You hear that something had hit the first tower, and like, wow, okay, that's crazy. And then it goes back to the regular news, the reporting, and then they keep cutting in and out, saying, "Here's another update on this report in New York." And of course, as time went on, it got more and more serious. And again, I'm driving, so I don't have a visual. I'm just trying to picture in my mind what they're saying. And they really weren't, at this point in the story, they weren't saying how major stuff was. They were just, saying something hit the tower. And of course, later, the second tower would be struck by another plane, and right away, I knew.
Where do you get your knowledge from? How much time do you have in a pilot?
Another.
Oh no! Okay.
Explosion.
Explosions, multiple explosions, ladies and gentlemen. We just saw another explosion. Obviously.
We're just watching it again. It's the first time. This is
the other tower, ladies and gentlemen. Another explosion at tower number 2.
Oh my God, that is a terrorist act. We're being attacked. We are being attacked. There's no doubt about it. And I just had this weird feeling come over me that I've never felt in my life. And you can call it, I don't fear. You can call it not excitement, but it's just weird because it felt like I was in a dream. And I was like, this is not happening. So I can only imagine what the people in New York that are witnessing this from the ground level, looking up, what they're thinking. But at this point in the story, I didn't know that it was that severe. I hear the second plane hits the second tower. Immediately, I look at my son. Now, he's looking out the passenger window, and he's just kind of, he's listening to his music. He's bobbing his head. I reach over, and I get his attention. And I said, take that stuff off. He took it off. He said, what's going on? I said, you need to listen to this. This is history in the making right now.
You can't have enough FBIs and enough police and enough National Guards to defend yourself against these attacks. It's impossible. What you have to do is deter the hate, deter the provocation, find out what the cause is, and attempt to deal with that.
I called my mother. I was, at this point in the trip, I'm probably about maybe just a touch over halfway getting to my parents, where they were living in a campground then. They were in like this transitional phase of, they had this nice camper, and they were getting ready to move into a double wide on the property at the lake, at the campground. I said, Mom, are you watching the news? She's like, yes. And she was trying to explain to me the horrific scenes that were being shown on the television. So my son and I, we get into the campground, and so we get out of the truck. My mom is leaning out the door. The camper's like, get in here. So I said, come on, son, let's go. So we go. And as soon as I walked in, I saw both towers on my mom's television. The shot was both towers, just smoke billowing out, black smoke just coming out. And that's when it hit me. And I thought to myself, oh my God, that's like, I had no clue it was like that. She's like, yeah. And she said, this is what I was trying to explain to you over the phone. I just sat down on the couch, and I was just frozen. And my eyes were just glued to the set.
We're getting a report from Associated Press now that the White House was evacuated after the Secret Service received what AP is describing as a credible threat of a terrorist attack against the White House itself.
Again, that feeling came over me. I was like, this can't be happening. And I meant to tell you this. Let me just backtrack for 1 second. When I was still on the way to my mother's and I got off the phone with her when she asked me, "Where are you at?" It was like I was in the Twilight Zone, because you're sitting there trying to contemplate what's going on. Again, when I go back like this, I haven't seen the visual yet on the television. But I knew it was bad. And I said, we're being attacked. This is a terrorist thing. This is not a joke. This wasn't an accident. This is on purpose. But when I got off the phone with her, I was driving and I looked, and as far as I could see on the interstate, there was nobody going eastbound, nobody coming westbound. I looked in my mirrors. There was nobody behind me. So for like, I don't know, maybe 2 minutes. And 2 minutes is a pretty, decent amount of time to be driving on the interstate and you don't see nothing. And this was at, just say, when the second tower got hit, you're looking at like what, 940, 935, something like that. Maybe I have to look that up to be sure. But so for like 2 or 3 minutes, there was no traffic, and I just felt like the only person, my son and I felt like we were the only people on the planet for that moment. And it was just like, I didn't like that feeling. It was weird. Okay. So anyway, let me go back to where I was at. So we're glued to the TV, right? And we're watching as it unfolds. And then you see people jump. People are up there waving the towels and everything and all that smoke. And I was just like, oh my God. And you see that horrific thing of the people jumping because they, that's so horrible. Can you imagine? I mean, you're sitting out of a skyscraper on the edge of the window and flames are behind you and it's so hot and you're like, what do you do? And they chose their own fate. And that was just, it was horrible. And when I saw that and just, I had tears welling up in my eyes because it was just like, oh my God. And all the people's reaction on the ground too, and this was real, man. This was not make believe. And of course, the first tower collapsed.
They were beginning to evacuate buildings. And then there was also another decision by the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. No planes are going to be allowed to take off from any airport in this entire country. No planes will be taking off today. They have made a decision to stop all air traffic control, all air traffic.
Marsha, we got to interrupt you. We just saw live from Chopper 2 yet another explosion. Did anybody, Janine, what did you see? You saw, was it an airplane or was it a...
It looked like a part of the building, if not most of the top, collapsed and all the debris from the building was falling down towards the ground.
Look at this smoke. Look at this smoke. This is
the whole building. Did it collapse?
Do we have Jim Smith available on microphone from Chopper 2 as he takes these pictures? Jim? Yeah.
If it couldn't get any worse, and then of course the other one collapsed and they were gone. And all that smoke and all that debris and all those papers flying through the air. I was just at a loss for words. Well, I stayed for a little while longer, not real long, because I had to get back to the house because I had, when I was living somewhere else in another town, but I had to get back because I had to come to work real early the next morning. So I went ahead and left, got back, and, of course, turned the TV on just like everybody else. And I watched as long as I could. I think I even watched some of the 11 o'clock news just to see how things were going. And got up the next day and went to work, and it was just like, you just felt this certain type of emotion in the air. I mean, it's just when you see somebody or whatever, everybody gives you that look like, yeah, we're going to band together and somebody's going to pay. So if you fast forward like maybe a week after 9/11, I noticed when I was, because then I was working first shift, I would get off work and I would come up the road, and there was this guy. He had like this table set up, and he was selling the T-shirts with Bin Laden's face on it with a target on it, and it just said "Wanted, Dead." It didn't say dead or alive. It said "Wanted, Dead." And he was selling those little windshield flags. You know, that was something that I noticed. People were buying those flags and those T-shirts. This guy was making a mint off the stuff. But I just could not bring myself. I just couldn't bring myself to pay money for something that this guy's making a profit off of somebody's demise. You know, these innocent people. I was like, man, I just can't. I can't bring myself to do that. And you know, for a while, you saw the windshield flags on people's vehicles, and you saw that everywhere. And then after a couple of months, it started to fade, and you didn't see it as much. You still saw it a little here and there, but it just started to fade. Fast forward to 2011, 10 years later, May 1st, I was on vacation that week because I always try to take the first week of May off for my birthday. Again, my son and I asked him if he wanted to go to Burger King to get some breakfast. He said, yeah. So we went, and we got there, and something that I never do, I never buy a newspaper. Or my dad always did that. He always, when we went to breakfast, or, you know, even when I was a young kid, he'd always get a paper out of the paper bin. He'd put 50 cents in there, get a paper. If it was Sunday, he put $1. I don't know what they cost nowadays, probably a whole lot more. But I've never been a newspaper person. But this particular day, I was, because we were getting ready to walk in the Burger King, and I looked, and there was a newspaper bin, and it said, Bin Laden killed by a Navy SEAL team. I said, wait a minute. So I went back to my truck, and I got some change. I got the paper, and there wasn't many in there. They were about all gone. And we went in there and ordered our breakfast. And my son and I went and, you know, sat down in a booth, and it was front page of news, and I was sitting there reading it, and I was like, wow, they finally got that son of a bitch. After 10 years, they finally got him. So that was another moment in history that I remember. But I want to wrap this up in saying I watched a video last night on YouTube of a man. I think he's a college professor, and he was speaking about 9/11 conspiracy theories. Now, when I first started to watch this video, I got angry. I was like, man, how dare you, man? And it's just, what? But at the end of the day, man, I wasn't there. I can't prove anything. I can just go by what I and many, many, many other people saw on TV that horrible day as it unfolded. So this guy basically says, I'm not going to go into a whole, I'll try to put a link down in the description to that video if you want to watch that seminar. It's interesting, you know, if you can have an open mind and you'll watch it. I thought it was interesting. Do I believe everything that he touches on? I mean, he's not saying this happened or this happened. He's just trying to, he wants you to open your mind to all the possibilities that could have happened. But at the end of the day, we don't really know. Only the government knows, and they're not going to tell us anything. So in a nutshell, he's saying, was it the terrorist, that big group of terrorists that came together and actually pulled this off, or did the government have something to do with this? Which for me, I just, when the towers collapsed, to me, when I saw that happen then in real time, I said, that looks just like when a building is imploded, because it'll implode and it just comes down like flattens out like a pancake. He touched on that, and I'm like, I don't know if I buy that. I mean, I've heard other people say that, and I'm like, well, how would people get in there and plant bombs on all the different levels of the Trade Center and nobody see that? I don't know. But I will say this: when I was about 10, my father, like I said, he worked for the power company, and one day they were going to implode an old skyscraper in downtown Charlotte, North Carolina. And my dad had to be there for this event because he was over a bunch of power crews, and they had to disconnect power lines. They had to move stuff out of the way. And then they just, he was just part of the whole thing. But after that building was imploded, I don't know, I guess it was about 2 or 3 weeks later, he brought a poster home for me, and he had it in a tube, in a cardboard tube, and he said, "Here, I thought you might like this." He said, "Remember when they had to implode that building in downtown?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, here's a picture," and it had like, I don't know, man, like 7 or 8 shots, and it was kind of like a quick timeline of how the implosion was happening. Like, first, picture 1 is just the skyscraper, and then picture 2 is when it starts, and then it's just a photo time lapse, I guess. I don't know if that's the right terminology, but and then the very last photo was just nothing but a lot of dust and dirt in the air. But the pictures showed how the building just came down like that right there, and I was like, wow. And I'm not saying that's what happened at 9/11. I don't buy that theory. It's just, but that did cross my mind when I saw it collapse straight down. I thought, wow, that looks like an implosion, but how is that possible? A lot of people say jet fuel and it was causing the explosions. Hey, man, very possible. I mean, to me, that's more believable than somebody planting bombs on different levels of the Trade Center and imploding it and all these people dying. It just, look, for me personally, I stick to the belief that those planes were hijacked, terrorists did this, and all these innocent people perished. And it's just a day I'll never forget, but I know as I get older, it seems to fade. This tragic event in history seems to fade further and further away. And that professor, when I saw his video, said this, so I can't take credit for it. Actually, somebody in the audience said it, and he said, yeah, that's correct. That's a great statement. And the lady in the audience said, the reason this is happening is because it's a generational separation. And makes perfect sense. And he gave an example. He said when he was young, really young, his parents talked about Pearl Harbor and how horrible that was. And when he was that young, of course, Pearl Harbor was long time ago, and he was like, okay, so he didn't care. That's the same thing that's happening now. People, or even young people, whatever, that are learning about 9/11, when it comes around and people say, never forget, never forget, never forget. But people are forgetting. But the only way people, especially young people, know about it now is if they do a search on the internet and they look at the old news footage, because back then there was no internet. There was no social media. You just relied on the TV and the news reports and the radio. So, a lot of this younger generation, they weren't even born when this happened. but it's something that I'll never forget. And this is my way of paying tribute to all the heroes that saved people and sadly people that perished. I hope you enjoyed this video. God bless America.